But, there's been a pretty strong response to what this company has said it's done, with people saying, like, kind of feels like this should be, more organized.
Yeah.
You shouldn't just be able to shoot things into the atmosphere willy-nilly. Although, somebody tell Elon Musk that. Joining us for this conversation is Guy McPherson. He's a scientist. He's professor emeritus of natural resources and ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Arizona. Guy, thanks for being here again.
Thanks for the opportunity to chat again, Michelle and John.
Welcome back.
So, this company makes sunsets. They say, operating on the idea that particulate matter in the upper atmosphere can actually alleviate global warming by blocking or reflecting the sun's rays. A representative from the company says he pumped a few grams of sulfur dioxide into weather balloons and added what he estimated would be the right amount of helium to carry them into the stratosphere. He expected they would burst under the pressure at that altitude and release the particles. It is, of course, not clear that actually happened, because there was no monitoring equipment on board the balloons to, track it. He also says the company didn't seek any approvals from government authorities or scientific agencies. They did this project in Mexico. I don't know, frankly, what approvals would have been necessary, since people do send balloons into the sky all the time. But he calls the attempt a science project, an experiment to see if he could do it. They also, this company, they seem to want to get in on the climate credit scheme, where instead of carbon credits, they would sell something like cooling credits. And I was curious to talk to you, Guy, because I think this concept of solar geoengineering is one that you might support in theory. And I know that you've talked about the mirror project on this show before, which involves Earth-based mirrors, so not atmospheric efforts. And so I want to ask what you make of this adventure by this group that, again, they're sort of taking the position that as activists, the time for radical action is now, and there's no time to wait around for things like, I don't know, large-scale implementation or government authority.
Oh. I heard you say scheme, but I'm pretty sure you meant scam when it comes to make sunsets. First of all, this goes back a long way, this idea. Stratospheric aerosol injection was first proposed by the Russian climatologist Mikhail Ivanovich Budiko in 1974, so that's quite a while ago. It has been most famously affiliated with Professor David Keith at Harvard University, who founded Carbon Engineering, a company developing technology to capture carbon dioxide directly from the air. Professor Keith and his research team are taking a very gradual approach, and I support that gradualism. In fact, their first field experiment, which would involve only local experimentation, has been delayed at least until 2024, the fall of 2024, as I recall. This experiment of theirs would inject aerosols into the stratosphere and evaluate the impacts. The focus on local implementation is an important step that follows the general conservative scientific approach for anything when it comes to scientific ideas. And this approach is in sharp contrast to the approach being taken by Make Sunsets, which seems to me just to throw all the darts we possibly can in the direction of the board and hope the server doesn't step in the way with the drinks. It's insane.
But so, you do think it is worth researching this idea of the, injecting particulate matter into the stratosphere to reflect or block the sun's rays. Like, that's worth exploring, just not in this way.
Yes, I think there's a lot of things that are worth exploring. We are, according to the very politically conservative body known as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we're in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change, and that does not bode well for humans or any other organisms on the planet. So I think we are at the point, maybe even beyond the point, that we need to do something rather than just throw up our hands and say, well, I guess all species go extinct. Our turn is next Tuesday or whatever. That just doesn't make sense. But this idea that it has apparently already been implemented is not following anything resembling a scientific approach. As you pointed out, they call themselves a cult, and I'm not sure they're generating a lot of confidence in their organization with that sort of talk.
Yeah. I also, on one hand, well, I guess I have two questions, but I will start with the idea that they are already envisioning this as a money making scheme, right? Which of course sent off alarm bells for me. And I wanted to ask what you think of these sort of carbon credit or carbon schooling schemes, and whether they have any kind of role, even as a sort of interim step toward more comprehensive change. Do we have to sort of maintain this profit motive for a little while longer, or act as though the market can drive people to change their behaviors, or pollute less?
Right. Well, there's a lot going on here, and we could talk about this. There have been entire conferences for many days hosted to focus on some sort of solar radiation management idea. And when it comes to climate change, in this particular type of approach, we don't really know what the outcome will be. That's why Professor David Keith and his research team were going to start locally rather than just throwing everything at the dartboard. Stratospheric aerosol injection definitely would produce a very transient effect. Nobody argues that point, that it would be very transient. Beyond that, we don't really know. And the impacts of the unknown are likely to be catastrophic. Most people suspect that precipitation patterns would change around the globe by putting a bunch of aerosols into the atmosphere. Obviously, that's going to attract nuclei for raindrops, and what rain occurs in one place is deprived from occurring in other places. Will it increase desertification worldwide? Will it do so at the expense of increasing floods in other locations? We don't really know. Injections would almost certainly need to be repeated very frequently, and the goals of David Keith's delayed experiment are determine, one, how much material to introduce into the atmosphere, and two, how long would the effects persist. Interestingly, Professor Keith is very attached to the idea of short-term effects, because such an approach will increase the income of a billionaire or two. And Dr. Keith has publicly criticized Dr. Tao's mere reflection framework, because the mere reflection framework is designed to be durable, and that's no way to make a lot of money for somebody who already has a lot of money. So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, but the role of treating, I guess, sort of units of climate change or climate improvement as things to be bought and sold. I'm not sure that I really feel like anything meaningful can be achieved with these sort of credits that are still relying on people who have made money by doing very bad things now deciding to make money by doing very good things, if you want to present buying a carbon credit as a good thing.
Well, and we don't even know. I think the whole thing just reeks of cult and money making as quickly as possible, and withholding information, or maybe the people just don't have the information. I don't know. I think the idea in general is based on the idea that we need to change the way we live, which is a great idea because we're in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change. But changing our behavior at a societal level requires a lot of effort on all of our parts. And so far, there's plenty of evidence to suggest that that's not going to happen and not going to produce the desired outcome at the societal level. Are you familiar with William Stanley Jevons and his 1865 book, The Coal Question, by chance?
No, I wish I was. I would feel really cool if I was able to say, oh yeah, it's one of my favorites. Yeah, no, The Coal Question. All right, what was the coal question?
Well, it's amazing because he came in The Coal Question, he came up with this daunting prospect that has become known as Jevons paradox. The short version goes something like this. The more efficient we become at using finite materials, the faster we use them. Jevons observed this pattern with respect to the coal during the mid-1800s. We saw the same pattern in the wake of the so-called Great Recession in 2008-2009. Rather than using advanced technology to manufacture automobiles with improved efficiency, automobiles were given more powerful engines. That was the outcome. The response to improved technologies that could have been used to create cars that obtain more miles per gallon was used instead to create muscle cars. So Jevons pointed out that any coal that was unused by the masses will be gobbled up by people who can afford the coal. And the same applies, obviously, to other fossil fuels. So, in other words, the ability of humanity to conserve fossil fuels runs contrary to societal behavior that we've known about since 1865. And that doesn't bode well. I want to give an example here because I think it's hilarious, and I'm not really hilarious on your show, so here's my chance. I heard this recently from a friend in Switzerland. She's a personal assistant to a billionaire. When her boss takes a trip in his personal jet, he uses 2 jets, not just one. The first jet is sent ahead of the one carrying the billionaire to identify turbulence. The jet with the
Are you kidding?
The jet with the billionaire on board therefore avoids those inconvenient air pockets.
Oh.
And no, I'm not kidding. Every time he takes a jet. Now, you and I can walk, we can ride our bicycles, we can take public transportation, but the conservation we practice is overwhelmed by wealthy people of privilege. And I've talked about wealthy people of privilege on this show before, but this is just a fine example of the sacrifice many people are unwilling to make. And those are the people who really need to make the sacrifices if we're going to fix something of this magnitude. It's not just you and me and, allegedly middle-class Americans who are going to fix it. No, we need help here, and we need big help in the form of big money or governments to change society in the way that we got to change it.
Yeah, I feel like, I was trying to, I do think this, makes sunsets. It just sounds like a total scam. But I have some sympathy for the people who say this problem is urgent and it's not being treated with urgency. And you have the, what are they called? Extinction
Rebellion?
Yeah. Extinction Rebellion. Yeah.
Yes.
I have some sympathy for this idea that you have to make people pay attention, but as you point out, Guy, it's not. I mean, of course, we should do what we can, but it is our personal conservation efforts are not what is needed right now, right? We need to impose some conservation measures on the people who are doing most of the damage, and so I don't see Extinction Rebellion, blocking traffic as getting us any closer to that goal.
Right.
I wonder if you see it differently.
I know what people are capable of doing. When I realized it was the monetary system that was driving us to extinction, I quit accepting paychecks to live off-grid. I lived off-grid for more than a decade. We can all live with a lot less than most of us believe is absolutely necessary for our lives. But none of that matters when we have billionaires and government officials who are making the important decisions. It doesn't matter what you and I, John, Michelle, and Guy think with respect to conservation of fossil fuels. It doesn't matter at all what we think if we got 20 billionaires out there who are destroying every minor improvement that we make. And I agree that Make Sunsets just seems like an unmitigated scam, and nobody's even paying attention, it seems to me, to what they're doing. It's written up in all kinds of news articles, but is any international organization, say the United Nations, home of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, are they going out there and seeing what's actually happening? If anything is being released into the atmosphere? I don't have any idea. Seems like these are the important questions that so far we've been walking away from.
Yeah, actually, do you have any idea of what kind of regulations there might be about what you can and can't just shoot up into the sky?
No, I don't. And I'm surprised that anybody can get away with this. Just because you go to Mexico, does that mean you can do anything you want, no matter what the potential consequences are? I mean, if it was the United States and some people from another country came in here and started contaminating the water or the air, I'm pretty sure the federal government would have something to say about that.
Actually, I have a funny story. I lived in Southeast Asia for a long time, and there are a couple of festivals that involve lighting little lanterns with candles and sending them off into the air.
Right, sure.
Very, very beautiful and moving to watch. And I was there with another expat friend of mine who is a real sort of third culture kid who was Australian but lived in Indonesia for a number of years and lived in California for a few years as an adult. We're watching these little flames go off over the incredibly lush, wet mountains in the middle of Laos. And she says, "Oh man, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do this in California also?" And her husband just looked at her and was like, "Oh my god!" Yeah, of course, yeah, sure. Just sending open flame into the hillsides of California. Fantastic.
You know, I lived in Tucson, Arizona for 20 years, and the big fireworks show was held every year right before the monsoonal rains came. And so they would launch these fireworks, and every single year they burned up an enormous amount of the Sonoran Desert by celebrating, right?
Yeah. Human beings, man. We are inexplicable, but pretty funny most of the time. Guy McPherson, really appreciate you joining us. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break here on Political Misfits and come back with a few last headlines for you. Stay tuned.